Hello and welcome to All About the Ancient World. Our channel is dedicated to promoting the voices of early career researchers and studies of the ancient world. This presentation is about depictions of the Roman toga, entitled Reexamining the Visual Impact of the Togate Body, Deviations and Codified Representations. It is presented by Erin Bello. Erin Bello received her bachelor's degrees in both art history and classical civilizations from the University of North Carolina at Asheville. She then attended John Cabot University for her master's in Rome, where her research focused on Roman statuary. She returned to Italy again to attend the certification program for the Association for Research into Crimes Against Art and is currently studying underwater cultural heritage crimes across the Mediterranean. Now, without further ado, please enjoy this presentation all about the ancient world.
Hello, my name is Erin Bello, and I am a graduate of art history from John Cabot in Rome, and my research is dedicated to the depictions of the toga throughout its usage in antiquity. Titled Reexamining the Visual Impact of the Togate Body, Deviations and Codified Representations, the goal of my research is dedicated to redefining these statues as art objects and how they interact among each other and similar pieces from the past. So, the toga is one of the few things that has really translated into the present world. It's usually in the form of John Belushi in Animal House, but it continues to color the modern image of the past. From statuary to repurposed sheets, most people have an idea of what the toga looks like, whether or not they've ever stepped foot into the ancient art section of a museum. The toga, as it was traditionally known, was a long piece of fabric that ranged in shape, typically made out of pounded wool that was then dyed various colors to represent status, wealth, or fashion styles. It appears early in the Republic, and it is written to have been the preferred garment of the founder of Rome, Romulus. What makes it interesting in regards to art history, however, is that the toga statue was known as a stock body, or a standard format of portraits, and was the most popular style used in the ancient world, far exceeding militaristic curist bodies and deified nudes. Despite what fraternity parties across the U.S. may suggest, the Romans had a very strict definition of what a toga was and what it meant to earn the right to wear one. A person's state of dress often defines them in any social or cultural setting, past or present, and this garment in particular stood as a visual representation of the people that created them. In the ancient world, there was nothing more Roman than the toga, an idea that is perpetuated to this day as it continues to stand as the ultimate fashion statement of antiquity. Virgil, in his epic, the Aeneid, writes, "Moreover, savage Juno will change her plans for the better, and will cherish the Romans with me, masters of the world, the race who wears the toga." And this terminology was repeated by various ancient authors such as Macrobius, Cicero, Suetonius, and others. The toga was idealized as the representation of civic duty and Roman morals, used in literature and art to define the people that were allowed the right to wear it. The current understanding of the toga as a garment has come from painting and statuary, as no remnant of togate fabric has lasted from the ancient world. The study of the toga has continued to really be simplified and centralized on aspects of the garment more often than its use as an artistic object. The interest has centered and remained on the toga as an ensemble, while disregarding the image and iconography stemming from its characteristics. The historiographic information and cultural significance is examined through authors such as Tanner, Stone, and Rothfuss. Goethe created a nearly complete catalog that emphasized stylistic shifts through a chronological lens of the toga and its many variations. And only recently have authors such as Trimble, Pfeiffer, and Rose begun to dissect the toga as a body and a representational object. However, the togate as a body has effectively been ignored in respect to the visual display and agency of the format, which, for me, raises several questions as an ancient art historian that I really wanted to examine in my research. how does the Togate statue body create a visual format, and why does the iconography used remain consistent or deviate? How do these components affect the sculptural display as a whole? And how does the discussion of the Togate body and its figure add to an understanding of Roman artistic choices, ideas, and techniques in regards to one of the most popular stock bodies used in the ancient world? So to achieve this, I decided to use a series of what I determined as 4 shifting frames with which to examine the Togate body and form. So the first being that of historical context, the second centered around the internal dialogue of the Togate body and how it responds to itself as an object, the third around the external dialogue and the visual play between other portraits and bodies, and the fourth and final focused ideas of agency and display, or how the Togate body works in public and private spaces as an art piece. So the first frame here will focus on how the toga was examined in previous literary sources and defined as an indication of idealized masculinity and citizenship. This includes the general components that make up the toga, such as fabrics, colorants, and styles. This is used to set up what has already been accomplished, but also really what is missing in the current discourse and how the Togate body is subverted as a representational object to remain focused on the political and historical background of the garment instead. The toga has been the focus of experimental archaeology and material culture, and many have attempted to recreate the garment as if we in the modern world could keep a piece of the ancients hanging in our own closets. The ensemble of the Romans had been examined through historical analysis, taking into account the ancient authors that comment on the tedious and annoying aspects of the toga in an attempt to better understand its use and appearance in the ancient world. The themes surrounding the Togate statue are continuously directed to the garment and what it represents to the wearer, how it is worn, or what it might have looked like on a moving physical body rather than a statue body. The toga, in regards to statue body types, is defined as representation for civic duty, personal control, and political power. It goes through a series of deviations and mutations. The weight, length, styling, and position of the fabric seemingly shifted throughout the centuries of its use. But no matter the fabric or attempt at recreation, there is really no exact duplication of the statue body in real life. The knotted waist really appears too thin, the fabric doesn't really move or fold in any similar fashion, nor does it rest across the chest or shoulders correctly. In order to analyze these changes and subcategories, we must be familiar with the distinct parts of the toga. So the figure on the right is a statue of Gaius Fundilius Doctus and has been marked with the different parts of the toga, while the attempted recreation on the side shows the issues of comparison on a live model. The umbo, or knob, was created through looping spare fabric through the balteus, or belt. The drapery of the Augustan toga is created through folding the fabric in half, then rolled to make the balteus and the knotted umbo. The sinus would go over the shoulder and behind the body to wrap around the front to create the dynamic movement of the garment. The lacinia were the angular ends of the toga that would sometimes be draped over the arm for easier movement, but were allowed to hang freely. There were several different styles of toga, ranging in colors and including particular adornments to depict status or achievements. There was a toga for mourning, and a toga specifically used when petitioning for political office, but the most depicted is that of the toga praetexta. This was the toga used by magistrates, freeborn children, and different priesthoods, marked with a purple striped border and worn with a tunic with 2 matching purple stripes. The 1st century orator, Quintilian, describes the appropriate disturbance of the toga and unraveling of one's appearance while giving powerful speeches, saying, "It is quite fitting for the sinus to slip off the shoulder, but if the toga falls down at the beginning or early in the speech, failure to put it back in place signifies neglect, tardiness, and ignorance of the way clothes should be worn. This devolving of the artifice is indicative of the physical display of the toga and the narrative it represents. This language is reflective of the display that is highlighted in the sculptural Togate body as well as the actual garment. So moving into the second frame that I use, the toga is examined as a singular entity that is fully encapsulated within its own image. This is used to confront the statue body as an object with a format that is successful over a long period of time because of the small changes and immediate recognizability. These small shifts and changes are a visual response to itself and previous iterations of the Togate figure, which establishes an interplay between the older and newer versions of the defining characteristics that make up the toga. So there are two major deviations of the Togate figure, once at the end of the Republic under Augustus and again in the 3rd century under Caracalla. Augustus redefined the toga at a time of socio-political upheaval and created a national costume that defined Romans in a single glance. This was an exclusive garment that was only allowed to freeborn Romans, forbidden those not of Roman nationality to wear it. The Edict of Caracalla in 212, on the other hand, offered citizenship to all provinces and, consequently, allowed the toga to be worn by anyone in a sprawling empire. Known as the banded toga, this next shift may have risen in popularity to become a distinguishing sartorial symbol among other Romans, as another way to exclude and portray one's own personal achievements and successes at a time of immense inclusion. The Augustan format expands the Republican style that's seen in the first image of the Ringatore in the National Archaeological Museum in Florence, creating a more voluminous and extravagant garment that already makes a much more impactful statement than its predecessor. The Via Labicana Augustan portrait has intricate folds and wrinkles that are incredibly dramatic, that creates a sharp contrast to the smooth features of the portrait head. This deviation, however, does not imply a singularity of one particular style, but rather that the new visual iconography of the toga allows a kind of retrospection and cohabitation of past and present styles. The arrows show how these images of both periods blend seamlessly together, while still remaining visually interesting, as well as communicating and connecting to other images of itself. This exemplifies the variability and malleability of the Togate as a format, the stylistic language relating to other parts of the portrait, as well as previous iterations of the depicted garment. The creation of such a mutative portrait was not done without purpose. This was a deliberate variation of style and technique, and the manipulation of appearance was a choice of skill to create a visual narrative against a common backdrop of previous Togate bodies. This is a technique referred to as code switching. Jane Pfeiffer writes, "Code switching when used in writing is often neither instant, impulsive, nor spontaneous, but can represent a well thought through and intentional mode of constructing and expressing identity." Instead of explaining the variation as downright random, practical, or aesthetic, code switching offers itself as a model of seeing this particular use of materials as meaningful variation. The toga then deviates in much smaller variations between the 1st and 3rd centuries. They expand, retract, become more dynamic in drapery, rhythm, and movement, and react and respond to the facial features of the portrait. The umbo in the 2nd century becomes incredibly large and then moves up towards the shoulder during the reign of Hadrian to appear more like a Greek himation, which can be seen in the second image here that is currently held in the Capitoline museums. His successor, Antonius Pius, seen directly next to him, appears to use a retrospective style that is very much like an Augustan portrait, only with deeper juxtaposition of light and shadow to complement the drilled beard. The 4th portrait of Maxentius, too, from the 4th century, wears an antiquated version of the toga that appears to refer back to the mid-1st to 2nd centuries. This shifting format created a visual landscape of change that allowed imperial figures to stand out and blend in equally. The variability is its key to its maintained use. Then, when we see the contabulate toga, it seems to have been created for a much more abbreviated format, such as in busts or in roundels on monuments. Here I've used triangles to accentuate the difference that the band across the chest creates. This is now a much more stately and refined appearance that is just not possible to achieve with an Augustan scenus on bust-type statues. The third frame expands further to examine the Togate in its duality and its multiplicity. This creates a dialogue of visual impact and response, a narrative of the statue body through expected appearances and micro-deviations, and in doing so demonstrates how the toga variations would blend into large mass groups while standing apart or creating subgroups amongst themselves. In group displays, the toga continues to be depicted in multiple formats. In the processional scenes of the Arapacas, 3 different styles of draping the toga are seen in correlation with the female stola on the right-hand side. The variation and retrospection in style and appearance, while adding visual interest, does not detract away from the continuous rhythmic movement of the directional frieze. Rather, it creates an aspect of conformity, community, and strength that is reflected in the nearly uninterrupted procession. This effect is used on both processional scenes of the Arapacas and visually enhances the sense of movement as well as unifying the congregation through the depictions of the garment. The rhythm of the drapery creates a cohesive collection that not only directs the eye, but combines the figures across the entirety of the frieze. The use of different styles and draping techniques creates more interest and brings attention to the events on the sarcophagus of the brothers, playing with texture, depth, movement, and rhythm. The banded toga creates a micro-grouping that separates them visually and iconographically from the rest of the composition. Here, on the decanalia base in the forum, is another example as to how the bodies no longer appear to flow quite so effortlessly together, but individualize each figure much more clearly across the head and shoulders. Whereas the Augustan toga of the 1st and 2nd centuries appears to combine and unify, the toga contabulata defines and separates. The final frame moves away from the technical aspects of formal analyses and towards viewership and reception, display and agency of a statue body. The last frame will widen the scope further to discuss how the toga would be viewed in ancient Rome and their function in a forum or private space. This will really attempt to move away from the toga as solely a symbol of national identity, but frame the Togate statue as a communicative part of an urban landscape that explores form and format with agency that is reliant on a viewer expectation and knowledge. So, Jennifer Trimble discusses a statue as a question, one that a viewer must answer through the persuasion of the artwork itself. This was managed through the idea of visual conventions and replication. The repeated conventions would create a standardized format that was easily recognizable, relying on a viewer's previous knowledge and perception. The statue performed an act by being. It fulfilled a need and supplied the viewer with information and narratives that were consistent yet entertaining. The Togate body was a replicated body, seen ubiquitously throughout the ancient world and used to connect figures in a scene as Roman citizens. Reuse and recycling could redefine a work in conjunction with newer or older images. The repurposed panels from a triumphal monument to Marcus Aurelius, now found on the Arch of Constantine, depict a sacrifice and providing rations and stand as purposeful additions that use the Togate body as a figure of civil authority. It constructed a communal appearance and equality during events of piety or charity that fit on a newer monument through continued relevance and appearance of a known and recognizable figural body. This relates to the reception and the effect that a consistent visual narrative that is established in viewing and the setting of presentation. The installation of pieces and their public display in prominent areas would announce the patron and command the attention of a viewer. It mattered where these works were and how they were constructed to create a response, visual, spatial, and even physical. The Arch of Septimius Severus in Leptis Magna highlights the code-switching aspect of Roman and provincial stylistic representations, while demanding a viewer's movement to completely observe the entirety of its monument. So through this shifting framework, the toga can be revealed not only as a state of dress or a mythical garment of the past that needs recreating, but as a visual object that must be treated as such. As an object, it performs as an art piece that is meant to persuade and captivate the viewer. This relies on previous expectations and a knowledge of the Togate body from ancient Romans, which allows for micro-deviations and large alterations during times of upheaval because of consistent characteristics. The previous discourse has centered around the Togate body and the social and cultural representations of the garment's historical background, and this work is not unfounded in any way. Those that wore the toga did so with the authority of the state and stood as representations of their people. The statues that lined the ancient forums were reflective of those same values of senators that held political office, young men approaching manhood, and emperors that stood as the first among all Romans. The reception of these sculptures were based on the knowledge and recognition of the sartorial symbol that was the garment that epitomized their roles and power among one another and the world. But these were also statues, foremost, and performed and communicated by artistic means, establishing a codified language of styles and techniques. They responded to the portrait face, other statues around them, such as similar togati or other body types, and created a means of deviation and assimilation simultaneously. The way to stand out was to blend in, relying on immediate recognizable characteristics that could be manipulated or varied for each figure, but fit within a formatted type. The deviation of these body types maintained their relevance and importance beyond their symbolic means, and are visual representations of response and communication of stylistic changes and movements. This change of perspective towards these figures is essential to our understanding of the Romans and their techniques, but also their perception of themselves as the race who wears the toga.
Thank you for watching Reexamining the Visual Impact of the Togate Body, Deviations and Codified Representations, presented by Erin Bello. If you have any questions about the content of this lecture, please leave a comment below. If you liked this video and want to see more, click the subscribe button and don't forget to hit the notification bell to get updates on future videos. You can also check out our website, which is linked in the description below, and follow us on social media so that you never miss an update. Now, if you're an early career researcher and you have an idea for a lecture of your own, we would love to hear from you. Please check out the call for papers on our website and consider applying today. Our next deadline is June 1st, 2023. We hope you enjoyed learning all about the ancient world, and we'll see you in the next video.